to the Construction Big Breakfast, where we give you a hearty serving of insider tips and business strategies to help fuel your day so you can thrive in the construction industry. Now, here's your host.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host Ben Pritchard and welcome to this week's episode of the Construction Big Breakfast. Today we're going to be diving into the topic of resilience, what that means for companies in construction. And joining me today is our special guest, Tim Whitehill, who has been researching this topic for a number of years. So welcome to the podcast, Tim. Can you give our listeners and viewers a little introduction to yourself and sort of what you're doing in terms of researching the topic?
Yeah, thanks Ben. It's Tim Whitehill, so not Tim Whitehall.
Sorry.
And I've been looking at organisational resilience as a topic in the construction sector for about 4 or 5 years now. As you know, I wrote a report with Constructing Excellence, which highlighted the agenda for construction. It was around the same time as the Carillion collapse, so it was a topic that came that just surfaced at the right moment in time. And yes, I'm doing further research around that with Liverpool John Moores University, where I'm studying for a doctorate in my own sense, but also just exposing this subject for the industry. So like you alluded to, we're looking at construction sector. It's how companies can understand resilience and build resilience.
So at some point next year, am I going to have to say Dr. Tim next time I see you?
My target is 2023.
2023.
I turned 50 in 2023, so that's my target.
That's your target. So Tim, as we mentioned, and as we've joked about slightly already, a question we ask all our guests, it's the most important question of every podcast, is what did you have for breakfast today?
I had a super granola bar bought at Cruise Station to get down on the train here. So nothing more exciting than that. No, and I'm terrible. I think every podcast I do, I introduce this bit with, I was planning on doing something more interesting, and the but this morning was I got an early train, so I was leaving the house at 6 a.m, and there's no chance, don't wake the dog up, never mind the kids and the wife. So I had a latte and a Lion bar bought at Greg's. So nothing very exciting. Wow. Yeah. Well, I feel like because it's full of nougat and nuts, it's slightly more healthy than a Mars bar, but I know deep down I'm kidding myself. Right, so on to more important topics. Like you say, organisational resilience. And you're right, the report that you wrote for CE, I remember it coming out and it was just so topical. It was sort of almost perfect timing because of everything that happened with Carillion. But I guess your background for a number of years now has been in more management consultancy. So it was something that you saw a lot of organisations not paying attention to, a concern of theirs. What got you interested in the topic in the first place? Well, it goes back to around about 2015, 2016 time. I was working with the National Federation of Builders at the time, and it was them who posed the question because they'd noticed in some of their membership that insolvency was seemingly more frequent at the time, and they were concerned as to why that was, and someone said how resilient is our sector. But that coincided as well. Actually, British Standards issued a standard in 2014 around organisational resilience, and there was some research in that report which showed that there was levels of resilience gaps across all sectors, but it didn't really specify whether that was in construction or not. So we carried out some research just to find out what the levels of resilience were. And one of the first things we stumbled across, was the fact that construction is consistently ranked first in terms of numbers of insolvencies each year, around about 3,000 firms a year. And it actually, COVID aside, has stemmed the flow a little bit, but we're around about that 3,000 to 3,500 firms a year going insolvent, and something like Carillion highlighted that fact because that was a major collapse, significant £7 billion worth of debt, 450 public sector projects in its order book that which collapsed as a result of that. So I, as a management consultant, specialising in the construction sector, I took the opportunity to, at that point, write the report, just expose. It was an expose report, if you like to say. We're not resilient. It's maybe something it's in our blind spot. But at the same time, what is resilient and what does it mean to the sector, and how do we approach it? So that was the early part of it. I then became involved in CITB funded program called Be Resilient, where we went around the country and did a series of workshops with leadership groups and such like, and just got further and further into the conversation of resilience. And that's now moved on to some deeper level research where I'm looking at the theoretical model of resilience and trying to transpose that into the organisations of our sector, because at the moment it's quite a nuanced concept, which needs the layers peeling back a bit and then formulating in a way that our sector can understand. So that's my aim.
So what you're hoping then from an output of your research is to have a bit of a framework where construction organisations specifically can pick it up and ask themselves the question of, am I resilient and how can I be more resilient?
Yeah, it's exactly that. That's what I want to achieve, because some confusion as well. A lot of people, when I entered the conversation around resilience, there's a bit of overlap, but not much, but people confuse resilience with business continuity. Now, business, just to define the two, business continuity is about understanding the risks, or the likely risks that can impact on your organisation, and then having management structures in place to cope with disruptive events if they should occur. And that's a momentary coping mechanism. Resilience is a more longer term, a more nuanced game plan, if you like, in terms of, the British Standard definition is an organisation, if I can get this right, an organisation's ability to anticipate, prepare, respond and adapt to both a sudden and incremental changes in its environment. So it's a longer game plan. It's more a strategic imperative that all organisations should have and embedded within their structures. So yeah, it's slightly different. And yeah, what I want to do is take it from that nuanced concept of resilience, because if you read the British Standard, they point you towards lots of management systems, from business continuity to quality management, safety management, information security, all these things. So, you can bulk yourself up on management systems, but is that really going to make you resilient? It's about understanding. What I want to do with my research is understand the complex system of a construction firm and understand those structures that do make it adaptable and more resilient, because from a theoretical perspective, resilience is a function of your vulnerability and your ability to change. And all firms, large or small, are vulnerable in certain moments, and it's their ability to adapt and respond in those moments, whether it's incremental or sudden, to change and build resilience. Because the other thing about makes resilience somewhat complex in its form is you're not resilient or not resilient. You are just more or less resilient. Yeah. And it's having an understanding of that.
See that it's interesting that the industry, as you say, is not resilient. If you look at the stats, lots of insolvencies and stuff like that. But that flexibility to adapt to change. You look at the COVID. You look at going back to the financial shocks of 2008 and the likes. Construction has some reputation of being flexible in the way that we have a fairly transient and mobile workforce. We have an ability to ramp up and ramp down, but it's all on a knife edge. Is essentially what we're saying.
It is, because the term insolvency is collapse. It's an unforeseen collapse. So to be a sector that has more insolvencies than any other sector means that we're not seeing the moment that we collapse. We may be hanging on, don't get me wrong, but it's understanding what is it that we're not responding to, because if you know you're going to collapse, then in good time you then can respond, can't you? But we're not somehow in our business models are not responding in time. So and it's not just about avoiding collapse. The definition of resilience is long-term survival and prosperity. So it's a competitive advantage, so that you can build resilience into your organisation, so that you're constantly succeeding. That should be the ultimate. And that the interesting thing for me as a management consultant, that was the moment that I realised that actually this approach is the ultimate competitive advantage. Because if you can embed that into your firm, your organisation, then you've got a better chance than the rest at long-term success. So as a management consultant who focuses on competitive advantage, change, you and I have been around the change agenda for a good decade or so now. So resilience is a fundamental, it's a foundation to achieving those changes. And you and I could sit here till Christmas talking about the lack of change in our sector. Yes, there's flexibility, maybe there's some agility in the marketplace, but those can change based on the nature, shape and form of the organisation. You'll see some that can't and some that can, and it's understanding how we do that rather than...
And it's all short term, really, isn't it? We can maybe overcome the short term, but long term isn't something that we're very good at managing, considering and building those relationships that help you for a long term, and building a process and a management team for the long term, a strategy for the long term, all those things that you're right, we've spoken about for a long time, never mind in the last couple of weeks and months when I've been part of one of your focus groups. We are, as an industry, not very good at long term, but is there an industry that is good? Is part of your research comparing us to other industries, or are you very focused on just...
No, my research is not trying to explain our situation in terms of where we stand in other sectors. I mean, it's quite crystal clear that we're top of the league in terms of insolvencies, by some margin as well. Other sectors, the graph goes, it's almost exponential. You get to construction and we go up. So I'm not trying to look at other sectors and compare them. I think I think where my research is trying to stand out is to contextualise, because the theoretical landscape understands what resilience is, whether that's an ecological system or a social system. The theory is the same. And then you look into different business sectors. Again, where the standards are and where the theoretical literature is, it's just in a broad sense. What I've taken the opportunity to do, and where my research is going, is saying, well, construction is an obvious problem. Maybe we just need to understand that contextual situation. And again, my research is not trying to explain that situation, but I've taken a design science research approach where I'm looking for pragmatic solutions to how we can, whether it's a conceptual model or a framework, can intervene in the sector to achieve better outcomes.
Because I guess it's very easy, when we're talking about insolvencies, it's very easy to jump to a conclusion. It's very easy to jump to poor margins and cash. Yeah. Cash being the key thing. A steady flow of cash isn't something that the industry's good at. We've had many a report about poor payment terms and all of this type of stuff, but that is a symptom as much as anything else of structural issues that cause it.
Exactly, and this is where my research is going beyond this, because there's a term known as the cybernetics when we talk about organisational science, and that's the ability for the system to feed back causality into itself and be able to respond. Now, I know the next phase of my research will go looking into organisations and looking at the cybernetics of the organisation. How does it feed back on its situation? Because it's that feedback, that causality loop that must be broken somewhere, because if we're going to have organisations that don't see collapse, then there must be no feedback coming into the organisation. And is cash the only indicator that we're using, and is cash a good enough indicator? Because what I would hope to come out of this is some sort of framework where we can understand what resilience indicators look like. And it might be different for individual firms, and it might be, and they use those indicators in different ways. But if we had indicators that gave us more than cash and profit and turnover, which I know that's what the industry by and large uses, what other indicators should we be highlighting and saying, actually, if you've got those indicators into your feedback loop, then you would have a better chance of seeing what's ahead of you. So.
And what about sort of position in the value chain, as it were? Tier ones, subcontractors, product manufacturers. Are there clear trends that the data shows there, or it's still too early to tell?
Again, I'm not looking too much at that, and I've taken a broad perspective on the marketplace. Whether you're tier 1, tier 2, you're all in that marketplace situation, and it's about building up some pragmatic solutions that give wherever you are in that system the opportunity to understand that system and perform better in that system, because that's where this takes you. When you get to such a complex and nuanced area, you have to treat it as a whole system and a complex system, and that's where the trouble begins, if you like, because I think in construction, and it's human instinct to do this, is try and break complexity down to simplicity. So things like cash indicators are simple to understand, and that's how we drive our organisations. Whereas if we need to understand more complexity, then maybe we need more indicators to come through. So that's where I'm taking it, and I'm hoping it will be applied at all tiers.
And I mean, from sort of what you're saying, what we're hoping the research will show you as well is that, if you're a more resilient organisation, you're a better organisation, you're a better run company, that you've got more opportunity for future growth, prosperity, and all those good things.
I would like to think that, one of the things, take Carillion for example, we would hope now going forward that procurement will want to place long-term orders, long-term relationships with firms that are showing those resilience patterns and driving their firms, because the Carillion collapse was significant and it's still being paid for. It's, last time accounting was costing the public sector 200 to 300 million pounds just alone in resolving its issues, but there would have been more knock-on effects, I'm sure. So, what was the question again? What did I get the question?
A more resilient business is a better business.
Yeah, it should be, and it's a competitive advantage. Again, the research that British Standards did and we did with Construction Excellence showed that 65% of leaders believe resilience is a key competitive advantage moving forward. And hey, COVID's happened, and people are recognise. I mean, the word resilience gets bounded about on in every aspect of life right now. So it should build better businesses. It should be it is part of the build back better conversation. It is all those things. We just need to figure out how in that sense. And actually, where we are as well, but probably as a result of COVID, other things, digital, we're probably facing the most transformative decade of a generation. All business models, and that's there's two challenges there. Is how do we transform, but secondly, an opportunity in the fact that we've got the opportunity to get more data into that feedback system. A lot of organisations are driven heuristically with symptomatic sets of data. But do they pull that super levels of data together in order to give a better understanding? Because it's really interesting. Following the bank's collapse in 2008, they introduced stress testing. So all banks are periodically stress tests, and it's stress tests with data. So these banks are understanding scenarios that are happening in the world, and they're able to reflect on those scenarios, extract the data from their organisation, and give an impression of essentially their resilience. And that gives confidence to the markets and confidence to the economy. So can we do that in construction? Can we stress test a construction firm?
And I guess that's where procurement. Because procurement at the moment, your financial KPIs and thinking, what is your turnover? Is it 4 times the size of the contract? And they so what?
So what?
Yeah. Whereas you're right, some more data focused stress test. The markets, the AA rating, AAA rating, all those sort of things. How should we invest in this company? Because that's what you're doing in many ways with procurement, isn't it? You're wanting an outcome, something to be built, but you're investing your capital in the belief that they can help you do that.
Because the other thing to appreciate about resilience is, and this is where I think the emphasis on the construction marketplace may have missed a trick, if you like. I would like to think that. But resilience is about understanding your internal environment, so understanding how you perform in an external environment. Now in construction, the Construction Excellence agenda and the change agenda is all about altering that external environment so it's maybe less harsh and less hazardous to the organisation, it's a safer environment for them to perform. But all external environments are subject to change and hazardous. You speak to anybody in retail or banking, they'll say their marketplace is fast moving, it's hazardous, and we have to respond to that challenge. Construction firms should have the same mindset. They've got to accept that it's a challenging environment, but the focus should be on is building resilience from within and not asking the market to change on its behalf. Now that's a lot. If you think about it, a lot of frameworks have all been about setting KPIs on project level performance. For the customer, that's the customer perspective. that doesn't alter the.
Well, it's not always the right customer though, is it? I mean, I think at times we're not very good at identifying who our true customer is.
Yeah.
You know, all this work that has been done, especially in the last few years, more so around what does value mean, the value framework, all these type of things. You know, they're helping us just better understand the environment and what we're really trying to do. I think we're quite poor as an industry in general of really answering the question, what's the point of what we're building at times? Because we transform people's lives for good.
We do.
Most of the time.
Well, we do.
But we're poor at answering what is the real question we're trying to answer in the first place. And you're right. You know, sometimes is the change agenda really trying to change the right thing? I guess is what you're trying to say there, isn't it? Yeah,
I'm saying we've got to build resilient business models that can perform well to the value the customer. At the moment, we've got, I would say, well, the indicators show that we've got less resilient business models performing not as well as we want to in the customer perspective. And that's what I'm hoping to change. Just as we as humans have had to become more resilient to COVID, can the construction sector become more resilient to the hazardous marketplace that it is? Can the firms themselves build their resilience? It's and is it so? You know, thinking of the change agenda. Then, so is it that resilience is something that only organisations can change and improve at, or is it something that an industry can become better at? It's an interesting question. Lots of people do get to that point. Can we look at the whole system and say, okay, the built environment, let's build resilience from start to finish? I think that's what we've been trying to do, and asking all the participants in that supply chain to adjust their policies for a smoother ride. We don't seem to get there, do we? No. And where it really falls down, the keystone in all this is when a contractor who you know, the contractor is the place where all the money goes through and then gets distributed out to the supply chain. And any collapse in that moment has a massive knock-on effect. And all, you know, from our societal input, our environmental input, our economical input, it all gets destroyed in that moment. So, again, that's looking. It's almost where we've been, is looking at whole perspective, getting better procurement, better contractors, better supply chain. And I'm not saying they don't feature in a resilient environment. They certainly do. But this is about taking a resilient perspective from that driving seat. Because in actual fact, the tier ones will, in order to build greater resilience, we'll have to integrate supply chains. We'll have to have those demand signals going up and down, and those indicators coming through that supply chain in order to, you know, that part of that feedback system will give them that resilience. So
get your house in order first.
It's one of the same thing, yeah. And I think, you know, it's just creating. Some of this is resilient mindsets. Some of this is processes and systems that achieve that, and some of that is culture and behaviour of the industry.
Yeah, it's you know, it's easy, isn't it? I mean, as an industry to turn and say, well, I can't do that if others don't. I mean, it's so often with the change agenda you hear, well, it needs the clients to do something first. But if you look at Carillion, you know, I know government procurement and everything isn't perfect, but it is one of the better ones.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure in terms of that change agenda and what we want to see in terms of payment and collaboration, I'm sure a lot of Carillion's work here in the UK would have been on good terms compared to a lot of it. So we can't say that you need your own house in order first and foremost, like you say, before the external environment can, because it'll just emphasise, I guess, it'll highlight the good and the bad of your own processes, procedures, and your own resilience.
Yeah, and it's each in, you know, we have to accept we are a system, a whole system, and there's individual participants in that supply chain, and it's building that resilience from within in each of those subsystems, if you like, because they're just subsystems, and where people interact, where processes interact, and systems interact as well. So it's looking at that level, gearing up. You know, what I want to do is, you know, look down the line, what is reality, the situation is, be able to go into organisations and say, well, this is where you are on that resilience spectrum. You the way you're behaving, the way you organise, essentially it's an organisational science. These are the changes you need to make in order to build your resilience, and hopefully that will transpire, hopefully.
So I think we've been talking for a while already, but just sort of quickly, if we sort of summarise where you are on your research journey.
Yeah, so I'm doing it's like almost front foot research. So I've done a lot of COVID slowed me down a little bit, so I had to turn to chat-based focus groups on LinkedIn rather than face-to-face focus groups, which is really interesting and really good outcomes actually. But I'm now stepping into the design phase where I'll be designing something to then trial out in the industry. So 1 or 2 firms I'll be working with in the next 12 months to actually implement a conceptual model or framework that actually moves them in the direction of greater resilience, and then I'll be able to write it all up and give it to the world in 2023.
All right, well, we look forward to hearing more about the outcomes. You never know, potentially using some of the outcomes here at Invennt with some of our customers. But it's been a very insightful, very enjoyable conversation as always, Tim. What we'll do is we'll put your contact details in the blurb for today's podcast. If anyone is interested in hearing more, are you interested in finding more organisations wanting to support?
Anybody wants to contact me, and any contact with the industry is great for me in this moment, so please contact me.
Fantastic, thank you. So to all our listeners and viewers today, thank you for tuning in. We hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. Please do remember to like, subscribe and share. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast or looking to collaborate in other ways, please visit our website, www.invennt.com. The link is in the description. Fill out a contact form so one of our team can get in touch. As always, thank you for joining us and see you next time.
Want to learn more about how Invennt can help your business maximize its bottom line? Head on over to www.invennt.com and get in touch with our team today. Thanks for joining us this week on the Construction Big Breakfast. Make sure to visit our website, www.invennt.com, where you can subscribe to the Construction Big Breakfast on all platforms so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a positive rating. Or if you'd simply share it with a friend, that would help us out too. Be sure to tune in for our next episode.